person watching this. Hope this video finds you well. Welcome to Musical Exploring Music with Kalyani. You must have come to know from the thumbnail and from the title of this video that in this video and in the next two videos we are talking about Western classical music and Hindustani classical music and the relationship between them. Let me start with a bit of a monologue. Why I was so curious about Western classical music was because all over the world, when the term classical music is used, it's with respect to Western classical music only. I'll give you a simple trick. Just Google classical music and see the first few searches you get. They will all be from Western classical music. Right? So, initially, I was introduced, first time I was exposed to Western classical music when I heard the song Itna Na Mujhse Tu Pyar Badha from Chhaya, and then I got to know that it is based on the 7th symphony of Mozart, and I had no clue about what a symphony was. Then I looked up the word in the dictionary, and the etymology of the word is very beautiful. Sim, the first part of the word, means together, and phone, the second part of the word, means sound. So symphony in that sense means creating the sound together. As someone who has been learning a kind of music where people perform with only tabla, tanpura and harmonium or sarangi, looking at a stage full of 40-50 artists, each sitting with their instrument and a booklet in the front was very, very strange. We often say that music is a universal language, but frankly, I was not able to understand this music without a translator. At times, I would try and attempt to search for similar or parallel things between Western and Hindustani classical music. Then I realized that I was trying to look at Western classical music from a lens of Hindustani classical music. But as I went on to gather more information about Western classical music, I realized that I had been missing out on a very beautiful kind of music so far. Naturally, since the tuition of Western classical music in India is not as prevalent as Hindustani music, many of us do not know many things about WCM, that is Western classical music. Which is why we have with us today in the first episode of East Meets West, someone who has had training in both the kinds of music. She had a basic training in Western classical music when she learnt piano as a teenager. Later she studied Western classical theory and composition at Trinity Laban Music School and Conservatory of Amsterdam. Currently she teaches music theory at the True School of Music. With a strong background in Western classical music, she started taking lessons of Hindustani classical music, Khayal Sangeet, from Dr. Ashwini Bhide Deshpande of Jaipur Atwali Gharana and her disciple Rituja Lad. While she recently started releasing her own music as an independent artist, she put to use her knowledge in both the schools of music. As she says, she likes to exist in what she calls a sweet spot where the East meets West. Let's welcome on board Zaee. Hi Zaee.
Hi, Kalyani.
Welcome to Musical, and thank you so much for doing this episode for East Meets West, where we are discussing the space or exchange between Hindustani and Western music. Uh, as we just saw in your intro, you have been in both the worlds and you have tasted a bit of both. So, can you please tell the audience about the beginning of your journey? How did this musical journey start?
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about of all time. So it's going to be fun. Thanks so much for having me. Well, about my musical journey, my parents are not musicians, they're software engineers, but they were very musically inclined. They used to play a lot of music from different parts of the world. So we would have a big box of CDs from Western classical music, and at the same time, we would have Indian classical. At the same time, we would have pop music. So I grew up listening to different kinds of music, and I never did music seriously until my teens. I used to go to classes. You know, people tend to small singing hobby classes, keyboard hobby classes. And so I used to go to hobby classes because I was interested, but I used to go to a keyboard class and play Bollywood songs. And it was fun until then I started realizing that, wait, there's something called classical piano and it's played very differently than what I'm learning. And that kicked an interest into being more serious into music. So I started classical piano seriously. And when I did classical piano seriously, I was already in my teens. So I was mature enough to understand exactly what I liked. And I realized that
Hmm.
more than just playing the musical pieces that great composers wrote, I enjoyed that. But I also enjoyed composing my own music. In fact, that started to become a more strong interest for me. I wanted to know, how does this work? How do you compose? And so I decided to do composition, and I decided that I wanted to be a music artist who composes, who releases music, and who, simply makes their own stuff, makes their own recordings. And I studied composition in the classical style abroad, but then I wanted to focus again on Indian music. I did not want to just do it superficially or merge these two styles superficially. And so I came back to Mumbai, where
Hmm.
I decided to finally, become an independent music artist or whatever that is. So that's how I got into music, actually. So right now I'm in a very sweet spot. I have a job. I have something very concrete to do, and at the side I'm also releasing music. So that's where I am right now.
That's great. So the first question that comes to me as somebody who has been learning Hindustani classical music for a couple of years and has only had a look at the Western classical music from outside is how do they start teaching you?
Hmm.
Because in Hindustani classical music, they will make you sit, make you sing Sare Gama Padanisa and back, and then they will slowly make you understand and recognize notes, etc. So how does it go in Western classical music? Do they teach in the same way or there is some other methodology?
So it depends a lot on the instrument that you choose to start on. I started on piano.
Okay.
And so obviously, the first few lessons are you getting familiar with your instrument. If you're a violinist, holding it correctly and understanding how to hold your bow. If you're a pianist, how to sit at the piano. But almost immediately, Western music training starts off with notation. Notation is a big part. So when you're a
Hmm.
child, or if you're a beginner in Western music, there are beginner Western music books. And they put a book in front of you and they immediately start talking to you about, hey, this note is called C. Next to this note is this note called D. This is how you're going to play it. And from the start, they give you little exercises to play. And these exercises are written in a very typical Western style. And these exercises, as they grow on and you grow and you spend more time learning, they become full fledged pieces of music. And then these pieces of music become the proper greats that classical composers like Mozart wrote. So from the beginning, you're exposed to a lot of typical Western repertoire, as they call it, which is a fancy word to just say pieces of music. Um, but you're exposed to a lot of these melodies from the start, and notation guides a lot of your experience. So the way you understand rhythm or pitch is very much guided by notation. At least for me, the way I understand rhythm has been guided by my teacher saying, "Hey, look at this note. It's shaped like this. It means this note goes for these many beats, and this is how you're going to play it." So notation is often an experience, which I think is quite different with Hindustani music. You don't directly go into the notation side. But when it's Western classical music, the notation guides you into it. It's like learning to read English or something. And one important thing that I've noticed, which is a huge difference, I personally feel, between Western classical sort of education is that it starts in school very, very properly. In a lot of schools in the UK and the US and Europe, music is a part of compulsory curriculum. The curriculum is written by experts. There's an entire governing body. It's like maths or English. It's not very different. It's as serious. And so a lot of children learn a lot of these basics from school itself. They will learn a bit of singing in school itself. You can't teach an instrument to so many children in school, but the basics of or the aesthetic of Western music is imbibed in schools. Right now, I teach at the German School of Bombay, which is a school which has the English national curriculum. And I've observed that from KG to grade 8, they have music. And even in KG, the outcomes of learning and what you're teaching them is extremely organized. It's compulsory. And it was very different because when I went to school, we had music in my school in Pune. But the teacher used to come, she used to sing Thoda Sa Re Ga Ma Pa and go, and then maybe sometimes we sang the song. But in this curriculum, it's very codified. You have different sections focusing on instruments, on composition, on notation. And so that's one thing I think other people who live abroad and learn Western music must be experiencing. They must experience this starting in school itself.
I see. So you mentioned about you starting with piano as a part of your initial training. So while in Hindustani classical music, khayal, which is vocal music, is the most prominent uh, kind of music in Hindustani world. There are also instrumental performances where you can have a sitar solo or you can have a sarod solo. Even you can have a tabla solo or that kind of a thing. And even in Hindustani, you make singers learn tabla and a little bit of harmonium, or you make percussionists or non-percussionists learn a little bit of vocals. Does it happen the same way in Western classical music also, or you stick yourself to one instrument, or you are also made to sing? And what's the scene in Western about this vocal and instrumental thing?
Well, there is definitely a parallel between being able to sing and being able to play your instrument. If you go to some of the top conservatories in the world, then their auditions, the way they take you in, they take an audition test, and a huge part of that audition test for everyone, no matter what instrument you play, is singing. So singing is important in, I
Hmm.
think, pretty much most traditions of music, and so it is in Western classical music. However, most people do try to focus on one thing. And I think that is also the case with Hindustani classical, that you focus on one thing and then you sort of grow yourself in other areas sometimes. So someone who plays violin might also like to just try out another string instrument, or they might also know how to play a little bit of piano, but they would like to focus on violin when they play in concerts. When they go to concerts, they're going as a violinist, and the keyboard playing is for a personal enrichment. It's not for performance per se. And when it comes to singing, the very interesting thing about Western classical, which I feel a lot of us miss, is that it wasn't always an instrument dominant style. Right now, a lot of Western classical comes across as being orchestras, pianos, like heavily instrument based. But it wasn't until like the 14th, 15th century that instrumental music got independence. Any kind of music in the world starts with the voice. That's your first instrument. So did Western
Hmm.
music. And they used to sing in the Renaissance, early Renaissance. They used to sing choirs and different things with voices, and instruments used to just be there accompanying, just. And it was only until 15th, 16th century that they gained absolute independence. And they were like, now we're going to just write pieces for instruments. But interestingly, a lot of instruments still imitate the singing aesthetic. So singing is a huge part for sure.
Right.
When I was playing piano, my teacher used to always say, hey, have a singing tone when you're playing that melody. So imitating singing as an aesthetic, I think, is something Hindustani classical also might have, and Western classical also might have in common. And yeah, it depends on who your teacher is, but mostly most people will emphasize being able to sing and pitch properly, or learning piano as an instrument, because piano is like it's treated as a bass instrument usually. So there is some amount of learning something else, and there is a lot of inspiration from vocal music for sure.
Right. In the first point that we discussed, you also mentioned about notation.
Mhm.
Now, that is something that we as Hindustani musicians mostly don't come across. I mean, it's very rarely that your teacher will tell you that this is saga, rema, or whatever it is. Or it is very rarely that you will actually write the tal in
Mhm.
your notebook and the words underneath it.
Mhm.
But this is a practice in Western classical. Now, sorry. Now, when you learn, when you learn your basics, as you pointed out, you are taught that this is C, this is D, this is E, and so on. But like we have Sare Gama in Hindustani, like C, D, E are all fixed pitches and they have their fixed frequencies.
Mhm.
We've also done an episode about it as to why Sa is so prominent in Hindustani classical music, because that is the base from where you get the relative frequencies. So you have absolute frequencies like C, D, E, and then you also have relative frequencies based on Do,
Mm.
which is parallel to Sa of Hindustani. So, how are you taught the relation between Do Re Mi and ABC?
Right. It's a very good question. And the do re mi system, as you correctly said, it is a relative pitch system. Your do is a movable object. Your do could be na,
Right.
your do could be na, 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 or it could be some other note. And you would sing the do re mi above it, but your alphabets are fixed frequencies, as you correctly pointed out. Now, when we're learning, if you're a singer, you're often started with do re mi, because it doesn't matter what you're singing, whether it's ABC or not. You usually start with do re mi because it's the solfege, it's the sargam of of
Hmm.
Western classical music. So singer will initially learn do re mi and they will learn how to pitch. An instrumentalist usually will learn how to play with the alphabets, because on an instrument it's much easier to point with an alphabet, right? On the piano they will show you a note and they'll be like, this note is C. It's C, it's fixed. It can never be, it can be a do sometimes for some scales, but its fixed
Hmm.
name, its frequency is C. And so when you're having an instrument, you're doing fixed frequencies, right? For a trumpet player, they will say, okay, if you press this down, then you get C. You get that
Hmm.
frequency will never change. Every time you press that button, that 440 hertz is always going to come out. So they will say, oh, that's an A or that's a C. Um, so instrumentalists will often do the C, D, E, F, G system, and Do, Re, Mi will be started off for singers, but eventually everyone has to read the same notation, the same sheet music. So eventually we all end up learning, the notation. That's the final game. Now, if you ask me about how they teach you to manage these both systems, it's not very confusing because do re mi is simply just a relative thing and it helps you to pitch. If you're a singer and if you see something notes that are a distance apart, using the do re mi system will help you pitch them. But if you're an instrumentalist, you're mostly gonna use the alphabet system. I have something to quickly demonstrate actually at this point about these two,
Please, please.
why we do not get confused. It's not confusing simply because every scale is a do re mi effect eventually, but it's just the starting note that differs. Some singers in Hindustani classical, they will tell you that they let's see if my screen is being shared. You can see my screen share, right?
Yes, I can see that.
So a lot of musicians in Hindustani classical, they'll say, hey, my scale is A, for example. So what they mean basically, they're singing these notes. That is
Hmm.
simply do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But if you look at the alphabets, it's going to be A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. But effectively, it is the do, re, mi scale itself.
Why I ask this is because, from a personal experience, I have seen harmonium players struggle with this. That I have always played in Pandri Char. So
Mm-hmm.
I am not able to shift. I am not able to play in Kari Path. I am not able to play in Pandri Saha.
Right.
So because they have always played in E,
Mm.
which is Pandri Char, they struggle to uh, transpose or adapt to some other
Mm.
pitch. While vocalists don't mind, like some rags I sing in Kai Char, some rags I sing in Kai Path, and even if you give me Kai Ek, I will sing a little bit lower and a little bit higher. That's about it. So vocalists don't find it so difficult, but when it comes to harmonium players, I have seen them struggle with this.
I see.
That I am not able to switch, I am not able to transpose. So then you have the scale changer harmoniums also. That if I
Really?
am accompanying yes, you do.
Whoa.
Accompanying a person.
Wow.
If I'm accompanying a vocalist who sings in Kaidon, I will tune my harmonium to Kaidon. So I am playing in Safed Char only, but
The sound
it is
comes out.
coming out as Kaidon.
Ah, okay. Honestly, this cannot happen in Western music because Western music is never taught in one scale or key. It's never like, hi, I play piano, so I'm going to play.
Right.
You have to play everything, and anything could be in any pitch. So that's why pitch is so absolute because it changes even in the middle of the piece. You modulate. Um,
It does.
your
Yeah.
your tonic or your shadaj can change middle of the piece. So there is no point to sticking to any one thing. Everyone has to learn absolute frequencies, including singers. One composer might write something that uses the B flat scale, that uses the shadaj on B flat. One composer might use something on a totally different shadaj. As a singer, your job is to sing those frequencies. As a pianist, your job is to play. So we are never taught to be in one scale at all. Everything is extremely moving.
Right. Can you explain the difference between these two concepts of scale and pitch first?
Sure. So you're quite right. A scale and pitch mean quite different things. Pitch basically means your frequency of singing, how high or low. And when people say that they sing in the G scale, they technically do mean that they sing in a pitch that is G, in which the G is their shadaj or their tonic. What a scale means officially is a collection of different pitches, a collection of different notes with one dominant or central note. One, they're centered around one important note, and that important note is called shadaj in Hindustani music, and it's called the tonic in Western music. So a set of pitches that are, centered around this main note is called a scale, essentially. And therefore, you can have different kinds of scales. You can have different kinds of pitches in that collection of pitches. So a scale is different than a pitch. You can play the same scale starting on different notes. Um, and in that case, in Western music, we call it a key. So, for example, when I say the key of C major, that means I'm starting the do re mi on C. But when I say the key of G, that means I'm starting the do re mi on the note G. So you can play the same scale. In Western music, the major scale is quite a common scale, which sounds like Sa Re Ga Ma Pa Dha Ni Sa. You can play the same scale starting on different pitches and therefore have different keys. So now I'll just quickly play a little bit for you to demonstrate how this works. So essentially what I was talking about is if you are in the key of C major, that means you are playing a song or a piece of music that has these notes. This is the C major scale. It starts on the note C, but you can have the same kind of scale, which is called the major scale, starting on a different note. Like this one starts on G. So the alphabet notes will change, but the scale is the same. You're still hearing the Sa Re Ga Ma Pa Dha Ni Sa, but you're hearing it at a different pitch. So this is called the key of C major because it starts on C and it has all the notes of the C major scale. And this is called the key of G major. So the word pitch that you use, Kalyani, often we refer to it as key. Another thing that I must explain is that, because I've played the major scale twice here, that's not the only scale that's used in Western music, obviously. There are other scales as well. There are many, many scales, but the most common are the major scale and the minor scales. There's only one major scale and it sounds like this. Ta-da! But in minor scales, you have different kinds of minor scales. One of them sounds like this. Which is called the natural minor. Then you have the harmonic minor, which sounds like this. And then you have the melodic minor scale, which climbs up differently and steps down differently. So ascent and descent is different. This is the melodic minor scale. It starts like this. So there are these three common minor scales and one major scale that are used the most in Western classical music. But later on, of course, a lot of different kind of scales also were used. So that is a scale.
Zai, while you were explaining the concept of scale and these many kinds of scales and types of scales, what I was reminded of is the concept of Thaat in Hindustani classical music. So, like what we have, sa re ga ma pa da ni sa sa ni da ba ma ga re sa. Now, this is what we call Thaat Bilawal in Hindustani music. Or when we make one note tivra, for example, sa re ga ma pa da ni sa sa ni da ba ma ga re sa. Then that becomes kalyan. So that goes for the concept of Thaat. Then if you drop two notes, for example, ma and ni, you get bhoop, which is sa re ga pa da sa la va ga re sa. So this is the set of notes that you use, and then you play with these notes in a specific pattern, and you get a raag. So do you see any parallels between the concept of scale in Western and the concept of Thaat or maybe even raag in Hindustani music?
So this is a great question because I get asked this a lot of times. People who are doing Western music ask about the Raag system. People who are doing Hindustani music ask about the scale system. So it's a great question. I see some parallels between the concept of Thaat and the concept of a scale. I think a Thaat essentially is a scale. What a scale is a collection of notes. So as you correctly said, the major scale means the Bilawal Thaat. However, the way it's used or the reason why the definition existed, I think, is very different. I think the Thaat system, from what I know, is uh, almost an organization system of putting ragas into specific areas and being, oh, look, all of these ragas use these kind of notes. So all of the
Hmm.
ragas belong to the Bilawal Thaat. They are using the major scale notes, but the ragas themselves are very different concepts. I don't think the concept of a scale or even the further concept of what they call a mode is any comparable to a rag because I think a rag is a capsule of a lot of melodic information, which the scale does not prescribe. In the rag, there are not just notes, there are note relationships. You might have rags with the exact same notes, but because of the chalan, because of the way you're ascending, descending, because of the way the notes interact, they sound very different. And so that's why you have all of these different ragas who might have the same notes but extremely different characters. So I think scale and Thaat can be said to be almost synonymous, but when it comes to a rag, I think a rag is a completely different tonal entity, and it has a lot more uh, material in it, a lot more prescriptions, and a lot more about the mood and about the flavor.
Zai, the next question I want to ask you is possibly the most asked and most dealt with question whenever it comes to comparing or looking at these systems together. Is that one system, which is Hindustani, is melody dominant, and the other system, which is Western, is harmony dominant. There are some very basic questions which you may even find silly, but when you take a music sheet in front of you, for example, if you're a part of an orchestra, there are 40, 50 other people playing along with you, and all of them also have a sheet in front of them. So is your sheet a combination or a compilation of all of what they are playing as well, or is it just your part? And when, especially when you are a pianist, you would get the linear time indication. You would have within that one staff, you would have the pitch indication, and then multiple staffs on the same page showing the harmony, whether you are playing one note at a time or two notes or three notes. Okay. And another question related to this is, there is this one person that we see in every recording of, I'm saying recording because I haven't witnessed any concert of Western classical live. Any recording of a Western classical concert is conductor. He is is the person who has a stick in his hand and is randomly moving the stick. And most of the people who are watching him don't, like me, most of the people like me who are watching him don't know what his job is. And so does this conductor person, does he also have a compilation of sheets of all the musicians in the orchestra, and how big does the book look? So is it like an encyclopedia which he keeps in front of him and then directs everybody as to what to play? So these are some questions that I have regarding, or you can say rather, stringing out of the basic concepts of melody and harmony on which the two systems are based.
That's a wonderful question, and I think it's also one of the most asked question to me.
Certainly.
So a lot of people say, "Oh, we want to learn harmony. How do we do harmony?" If you learn harmony, it's going to take you years, and if you actually learn it, then you've got Western classical music. So that is essentially the crux. A lot of times, the crux of Western classical music is its harmony. Your questions are very specific. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a score of a symphony. This is Symphony 5 from Beethoven. Da, 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 that one. I'll show you a screen in which you'll see
Yeah.
the score, and I'll tell you exactly what's happening there. Okay, so can you see the screen, Kalyani? Can you see like
Yes, yes, I can.
what you're seeing in front of you is Beethoven's Symphony 5 and a score I found online. You do find scores of symphonies online. Now look at this part. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It had 12 lines in it, and there's a note, there's a word written. Flauti means flute, oboe means oboe, clarinetti means clarinet. This is all in Italian, which is generally the language that a lot of musical terms are written in. Fagotti means bassoon, corni means horns, etc. So basically, these are all different instruments. You can see the violins, violino 1, violino 2, viola, violoncello, bass. Violoncello means basically our cello. So this is what the conductor is seeing. He's seeing all of these parts together. But what the violin player is seeing, violin 1 player, is only seeing his part, only his line. So every person gets their own part. The conductor, however, usually sees this entire thing in front of him. And let's look at the first few things. You can see that in the first bar of music, it's the first lines, there's nothing but a small square in front of the flauti, the flutes, and the oboes, and the fagotti and the corni. So some instruments are not playing in that time. You can see that. It's very easy to see. They don't have anything but a black square written in front of them, which means that they are tassé or silent. So it's easy for a conductor to look at this music and be like, oh, look, these are the people who are playing and these are the people who are not. And it's easy for the instruments will only get their own line to say, hey, I am just going to be silent in this part, so let me just keep counting the counts until when I'm going to start playing. And because sometimes you might lose track, the conductor is there to give a visual guide to you. So you will be looking at the conductor and the conductor might wave his hand to say, now, as a flute player, this is your entry point. Do you sort of get what I mean? It's like the conductor is a gestural guide to all of what is going on. He will make gestures to show the orchestra who is going to step in at one point, who is playing at which point. You can see who is playing and who is not playing during this time. You can see that sometimes the entire orchestra is playing. You can see a lot of people playing together. And you can see a lot of different lines. So the notation is visually very easy. And this is what the conductor is seeing. But if you look at the individual player, they're only seeing their own line. So what they're probably seeing is, let's see. So that's what the conductor is seeing. The thing that I showed you earlier is what the conductor is seeing. But what the individual player is seeing is only his own line. So for example, if I play trumpet as part of orchestra, I'm only seeing something like this. I'm only seeing one line of music at a time. And all of that is the notes that I have to play. So I'm only seeing my own part and everyone has to play together. All of their parts are contributing to this large sound. And that's why you need a leader of the orchestra. And that's why you need a conductor, because everyone is trying to play their own part. And there's many, many instruments playing together. Not everyone is obviously playing exactly a different tune or exactly a different material. There might be the entire violin section is playing one thing, the entire string, the trumpets entirely are playing one thing. So you and the violinists next to you are playing the same thing, but everyone else in the orchestra is playing something different. So the conductor's job is to glue all of these people together and to give visual cues to someone to enter in. So he might be conducting or she might be conducting, and they will be like, oh, now the trumpet has to enter and play a melody. And so they will, show the trumpet that the trumpet has to enter. Because a lot of times, not everyone in the orchestra is playing all the time. So they will be just sitting like that, and they will wait for the conductor to give them a cue to start enter and do their part. So that's one thing the conductor does, but the conductor also interprets the music. I showed you the first score where you can see everyone's parts together. The conductor is looking at that. And a lot of music is subjective, right? The composer in Western music, they can write down that, oh, in this section, you must go fast. Going fast for me and going fast for you can be very different. So it's the conductor who decides how fast, how slow, how much do we accelerate or decelerate or play loud or soft. So it's the conductor's guidance that you're doing. And a lot of the hand signals that the conductor is doing are a gestural guide. So the basic signal they do is often for the meter or the counting. If you have something in a 3 meter or a time signature of 3/4, then they would do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that is what that signal actually means. It gives you a downbeat. That's number 1, 2, and 3. But after that, you will see them making all sorts of different gestures, such as get louder, play beautifully, silently, be softer, be softer. And you're continuously, as an orchestra player, looking at the conductor and understanding what exactly he or she wants from you. So it's the conductor's interpretation. I often compare it to the director of the movie. Someone else writes the story, someone else has written the script, but the director decides how it's going to be executed. So the conductor is someone who decides how it's going to be executed. Even if the piece is written by Beethoven, even if the orchestra is London Symphony Orchestra, the conductor that day will decide how is it going to be executed. How loud is too loud? How soft is softer going to be? How are we going to get faster and slower? And so if you listen to the same recording of different orchestras with different conductors of the same piece of music, they will sound differently because the interpretation of every conductor is different. So that's what a conductor does. Now to come to a pianist, pianist scores are very neatly written. I'll quickly show you a pianist score. And you have one thing written for your left hand and one for your right hand, so it's quite neat. Here we go. So you can see on the screen, there's 2 sets of lines. One is the top one, and one is the bottom one. So I'll see if I can highlight it. This part is going to be for your right hand, and this is for your left hand. So you know what your right hand is, playing. And now let me highlight some other points in the score. You can see that they're playing together in most places. These 2 notes are being played together. These 2 notes are being played together. So they're aligned. And sometimes both hands are playing many notes together at one time. Let me find a suitable place. At the beginning, you can see that the left hand is playing these 2 notes together already, and plus the right hand is playing this. So when you're taught to read this notation, all of this happens quite naturally, and you're able to understand that visually very, very fast. So it's not very confusing. It's actually an incredible neat way of notating anything. I think Western music notation is one of the greatest things that they managed to do while inventing, while essentially their classical music style was existing. This notation was one of the most important things that they made and was very important for them as well. So yeah, all of this is telling you what to do with your hands as a piano player.
So now that we have understood how the documentation of a harmony works, which is basically multiple notes playing at the same time, maybe on different instruments or maybe on the same instrument, like you just showed of the piano. But now I want you to just throw some light on the basic difference between harmony and melody, because the whole of Hindustani classical music is based on melody. You perceive one note, one key at one time. You are only processing that sa or re or ga, which the vocalist or the instrumentalist is playing, which is not the case with Western music. At the same time, you are processing more than one notes. So I would like you to tell the viewers a little more about how the system works and what is the difference between the impact which these systems make on the listener.
Sure. So how harmony works is basically the entire crux of Western music. And if people, often approach me and say, "Hey, can we do like a harmony workshop?" And I was like, "Do you have the time to do a workshop for 7, 8 years? Because then that would be the end of it." Because harmony is an extremely, it's a subject of great study in Western music, and it's very important, as you said. Now, as fundamental concepts, melody is linear, right? There's one line playing, it's doing its thing, one person is singing. And harmony is the idea of vertical. One line is playing, beneath it, another line is playing that has its own notes, separate notes, different notes, but it's complementing this first line. And maybe there's another line as well playing. So the idea of harmony is vertically looking at things. We often don't look vertically in Hindustani music. We look at, oh, this note is leading to this note, is leading to this note. Whereas in Western music, it's this entire harmony vertically is leading to the next vertical harmony. So it's like columns stacked upon each other. I have a very easy video to show about the difference in the impact. If the melody is simple, harmony can add to it a lot of dimensions. It's like watching something in 1D versus something being 3D. So the sound that you get once you harmonize a melody, once you add harmonies to a melody, is the effect of it containing different dimensions.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. That saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
You can clearly see that when the three girls sing the same tune together, it sounds nice. It sounds like there's a layer. But when they sing the same tune with some harmonies added to it, it gives a very different impact. So the idea of harmony is to give that sort of impact. Now, a lot of people think this is a sort of assumption or even a misconception almost that harmony means if I am singing sa, then you sing go and po, and it's done with. But that's not it. It's also how you progress between different kinds of harmonies. Indian classical music, every note has its sthan or its place, right? We say this is the vadi, this is the samvadi. This guy leads to this guy. In Western music, every note has a chord on it, a basic chord on it, and that chord has a relationship with all the other chords. So you have a tonic chord, a dominant chord, a chord on the first note, a chord on the second note of the scale, and all of these chords are going to interact. So there's a horizontal dimension that you're hearing a melody. There's also a vertical dimension to it. So essentially, if I am in playing something that is in C, then this is your chord. That is, let me share this. Wait. Last long enough, my child, please. So this is your main chord, which is your C chord. Another chord as a part of this scale is the G chord. these two have a relationship. This progresses to this, maybe to this. So what progresses to what is also important. All of these notes are still the white notes of the keyboard. They are still within the C major scale, but the chords
Right.
are being formed. They are interacting with each other, yeah? So this is the C major chord, which will be interacting with the F major chord, as we call it, which will be interacting with another chord, the G major chord, which might interact with another chord again. So how this progresses decides the mood. So if I play something like this, this sounds very firm, this sounds very strong, as if, good, a piece has ended on a strong note. However, if I play something like this, this gives a little more of a solemn, unfinished feel to it. So how these chords interact, what they do, decide a lot of the expression in this music, a lot of what's going on.
So, Zai, what we just spoke about is one aspect of music, which is melody, which is sur in Hindustani. And let's go to now the other aspect of rhythm, which is time, rhythm, or tal.
Mhm.
So in Hindustani, what we observe is there are cycles of tal, there are rhythm cycles. So we have a cycle of 16 beats that we call teen tal. We have a cycle of 10 beats that we call jhap tal. And then we position these beats at such distance as we like. So sometimes it's madhyalay, sometimes it's drutalay, sometimes it's vilambitlay. But in Western music, there is no cycle, there is no circular system, there is linear system. You start with one beat and then you go ahead and then it goes on. So how do you perceive these two systems and what are the differences between the two systems? One being linear and the other being circular.
So, as you rightly said, the circular system in which you have a sum and you return to where you
Hmm.
started. That aesthetic or that perception itself is not present in Western music rhythm treatment. But one common aspect is the understanding of meter. Meter as the basic,
Hmm.
the basis. For example, if you have a 4 meter, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can say that teen tal is a tal in 4 meter. Na, dhin, dhin, na, na. So you can sort of summarize that there are different kinds of basic meters upon which different tals are constructed. And I think Western music is more concerned with these meters. So there'll be a meter of 4,
Hmm.
there'll be a meter of 3. A 3 meter will go like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like a waltz. Or there'll be
Hmm.
a meter of 6, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So a lot of the rhythm and the meter is there to give you the feel of the music. So the concept is
Hmm.
officially called a time signature, but what it is doing is it's giving you small divisions of 4 beats each, like khanda, but they're called bars in music or measures. And music
Hmm.
is being organized according to these khanda or these bars. And the time signature is telling you the feel of the music, therefore. If you listen to any kind of pop song or any kind of non-classical song, it's mostly in 4/4. You have this ching 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 ching. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. So the understanding of a basic meter is what is most important in Western classical music as well, and that itself has led to Western pop music. So therefore, the example I gave of pop music. So the basic idea of meter between these two traditions is similar. You can have a 7 meter. 7 meter could be Rupak Tal. It could be another Tal like Deep Chandi maybe. But the meter will be 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Or the divisions might change, but basically you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the basic counts and the meter is what is important in Western music rhythm systems and the divisions of notation. So it's about the feel more than the circle or the cyclical thing. And I actually struggled with this when I started learning Hindustani music because I used to count, obsessively count, because counting is a big thing when you're doing Western music. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it was very hard to count as well as improvise in Rupak, for example. I was not able to
Hmm.
multitask. And then my teacher said, don't count, listen to the sound. Don't just count
Right.
blindly. Just listen to the sound. You'll hear a tin, tin, din. You'll hear a din there. You know you're on beat number 4. And then that started
Hmm.
to really open up my perception because there is no sound understanding of the rhythm cycle in Western music. There's no compulsion that the sound is going to change at any point. So that was a huge thing I realized when I started learning Hindustani classical again, that you could focus a lot on the weightage and the sound to understand where you are on the cycle. You don't have to obsessively count all 16 beats, whereas in Western music, you're generally counting a lot because the cycles are usually 7, 9. They're not going to be 16 because 16 will be just compressed to 4 because 4, 4, 4, 4. Char
Hmm.
khand, as we say, or 4 bars. So it'll just be compressed to 4. So no one will really write something like 16. That's why the counting is necessary in that tradition. Whereas in Hindustani music, it's the sound that's also changing. So that's something
Right.
really interesting.
And what I am reminded of after you told me your experience with Rupak is that with the same 7-beat meter, let's call it, you have Rupak of 7, you have Jumra of 14,
Yeah,
you have Deepchandi of 14, you have Dhamar of 14,
exactly.
you have Satwa of Sat.
Exactly.
So that explains why so many tals with the same meter, which is 7,
Mm.
because you have a different sound for every tal, which we call theka of the tal. Lastly, Zai, since you have worked in both worlds of music, can you tell our viewers about your experiences which you had while working in these fields? From going a little bit of Hindustani training, then switch to Western, coming back to Hindustani. Did your Hindustani music training help you in Western, and if it did, in what way? And vice versa. Was there any confusion? Did you ever tempt to compare these systems in terms of the parallel concepts, or did you ever tempt to uh, try and fetch the common concepts and try to work on them to make something new? And did you ever get confused in that process? So basically your uh, in in terms of your journey that you have had through the different stages of your music training, what has been your experience overall?
Okay, that's a really great question. And I think I'm going to have a lot of fun answering it. So, firstly, I started doing a little bit of Hindustani classical, as you said. And for I think 1 or 2 years, all I did is do all the sur training, just sing the alankars, sing the exercises. And so my pitch sense was very accurate as a child. And so when I started to learn Western keyboard, that really helped me, that the sense of pitch and rhythm was very accurate. So I have observed that any classical style that you train in, your basics get very strong. Your basic understanding of pitch, the ability to sing or play in rhythm, the ability to understand when to start playing and stop playing, the ability to understand what is correct pitch and what is basur or not correct pitch, that is developed in almost all classical traditions universally, I feel. So all classical training that anyone has, I think, helps. So for me, the Hindustani training helped me in the Western training initially because I was able to pitch properly. I was able to play in rhythm. But then as the classical music, the classical piano training grew, and that became a little more dominant, when I returned to Hindustani music again, the classical training in piano and general Western classical, it helped me, but it also held me back in some places. It helped me because the understanding, as I said, of rhythm, of how to sing, of the pitch, that was quite strong. I would understand if, like, I would understand if someone said to me, this is Rupak Tal, it has 7 beats, and this is how it sounds. I was able to grasp, I think, basic things a lot quicker than if I had been completely untrained in music before. Um, But one thing I really struggled with is singing a mean and singing mindine gane, as my teacher says, to sing with means, to sing in a smooth way. Because Western music singing can often be very angular. And I always say this, that Hindustani classical music doesn't just exist in the notes, it exists between the notes as well. How you move from one note to another is as important as the notes themselves. Whereas, am I audible again? Because my internet shows minor fluctuation. Okay, so that's what I observed, that a lot of Hindustani classical music exists between the notes as much as on the notes themselves. What happens between these two notes is as important, the mean is as important as the notes themselves. Whereas a lot of Western classical is obviously quite angular because it's more concerned with the harmonies going underneath. So you have to pitch the note exactly. It doesn't really matter how you move. There's no such concept as a mean or all these contours and all these very nuanced, finer melodic details. So I found it really hard to sing ornaments. I found it really hard to sing a mean. I struggled with a mean. I remember my teacher took up Raag Shuddh Sarang to teach me, because the other people also were singing that. And there's a mare mean in that. And I just kept singing the ga in between. I didn't know how to not sing the ga. I didn't know how to move from ma to re smoothly at all. That gap was very difficult for me. And that was my first exposure to a very good mean. And then, it was hard, but then with a lot of listening and a lot of practice, I finally managed to understand it at least and somewhat be able to sing it. So that is something that happened. Western classical music did hold me back a little bit because you're not used to singing in this particular way. You're not used to treating melodies with such precision and such detail to every little ornament and every little mean. But then I learned, so that was fun. When it comes to approaching these two music styles, you said if I, ever compared them or ever mixed them, I think all music ever in the world has a couple of basic factors, right? There's some basic things. Any music tradition, you're looking at Western music, Indian music, if you look at Arabic music, if you look at Indonesian music, whichever music style you look at, there's a pitch element, something is melodic. There's a rhythm element, something is happening in tempo or, in some sort of pulse. Sometimes there's no pulse, but then there's long and short notes. So there's some sort of element of rhythm. Then there is dynamics, loudness and softness. There are words for traditions which have singing. There's some fixed compositions or unfixed compositions or a mixture of these. But all of these things are common to all world traditions, whichever you are looking at. So I think these basic factors can be compared, but the complex ones, I don't really compare them in my head. I treat them very differently. I treat a scale in Western music very differently to a rag, and I know they're not the same, so I don't need to compare them. So I often think that we get very busy in comparing the complex concepts, in comparing the more developed concepts. And we forget that music is very basic and abstract sometimes. It's sound, it's color, it's instruments, it's pitch, it's rhythm. And that is something that we can compare a little more. And aesthetics is something we can compare a little more. So I often, when I compose music, I often try and think more from the basic abstract perspective rather than a very concrete perspective. So instead of saying that, this is a rag, now to make it Western, should I add some piano or whatever? I just think in a very basic thing, in a basic way almost. So yeah, if you ask me about comparison, I don't compare the concrete complex concepts. I compare the more abstract and the more sound-based ones. I learn them as pretty much separate entities, but I do allow a lot of intermingling. I think both of these traditions have a lot to offer in general. One is very strong in the way it approaches melody, and one is very strong in the way it approaches the vertical element or the harmony. And so they almost complement each other in my head sometimes. And yeah, I allow them to mix, but when I'm learning them, I learn them as what they are, as their own absolute truths, without trying to think of anything as a basis for anything else. And I think I'm very lucky to get to learn the best of both. Uh, and I don't have a confusion per se in this matter. This reminds me that I have released a song last month, which I think demonstrates pretty much what goes on in my head with these two styles of music. It's a song I composed and I co-produced. So is it okay if I play like the first 2 minutes of it for you? Maybe it helps.
Of course, go ahead. It would be our privilege.
Um, so to say a little bit about the song, it's called What I Want. And I've experimented with two ragas, Bibhas, this is the Shuddha Dhaivat Bibhas, and Bhoop. And I like these two ragas because it's very strange to me that the changing of one little sur makes so much of a difference, you know. Bibhas with the Shuddha Dhaivat is just Raag Bhoop with a Komal Rishabh. But it makes a huge difference. And the harmonies that you can put underneath these two also make a huge difference. And so this particular composition was driven by that fact that I had this fascination with these two ragas, and it's called What I Want. And here it goes.
But if you can worship the best of me, you've got to